We're going to take some questions. Prefer that you kind of hold your questions until after all three have spoken. Okay? So Chief Steve Drew.
Well, good evening. Thank you all for joining us today. And I know there was some question about, as we go forward and share some information today, I know there was some question about when we would deliver some remarks and comments. I think that's important to our community, right? But we wanted to make sure that we took some time and gathered some information. We had some good information to deliver and clear some things up. So my name is Steve Drew. I'm the Chief of Police here in Newport News, and I will tell you that this is an unprecedented situation that we're dealing with. A 6-year-old. It is unprecedented. So there are some nuances here. Last Friday was a hard day for our city, for all of us, and there were a lot of heroes. I will tell you that Saturday afternoon I was able to meet with family, and I was humbled, but I was able to meet with Abigail Zwerner. Abigail is a 25-year-old teacher, and she is a trooper. She is a hero. I talked with her, so before I talk today, I'm going to go through the timeline, establish that a little bit for you, talk about our officer response, what happened while we were there, and where we're at in our investigation. But please remember that we are only 3 days into this, that there's a lot of things that still need to happen, and I'll talk about that as we go forward. But there are some questions that we will not be able to answer because of where we're at with this investigation. When I met with Abigail's family on Saturday, and they took me up to her room, she asked me, first question, do you know how my students are? She was worried about them. And then today, when I went back to share with her that we were going to hold this press conference today, she again asked me, do you know how my students are? And that touched me, her family and her mother. Abigail wanted me to tell you all, but primarily her students and her parents of her students, that she is in stable condition and that she is thankful for the thoughts and prayers that have gone out to her, the people that have reached out not only here locally, across our state and across our nation. She is very, very appreciative of the support that she's getting and continues to get. So I just want to establish with you a brief timeline. Last Friday at Richneck Elementary School on January the 6th, at 1:59, a call came in and advised that a teacher had been shot, and there was no other information that came forward. Officers were dispatched at 2:00 p.m. Personnel to Richneck Elementary. And anytime we have a situation where there is a shooter or they believe a possible active shooter, officers are going to come from all over. So there were officers from different areas there. At 2:04, 2 sheriff deputies arrived at the school and entered the classroom where this shooting took place. And we'll talk a little bit shortly here that it was not an active shooter going on throughout the school. Everything happened in one classroom. 2 sheriff deputies entered at 2:04, and about 8 to 10 seconds behind them, 2 officers entered. When they entered the room, they found a 6-year-old child that was being physically restrained by a school employee. The child became a little combative, actually struck the school employee that was restraining him, and officers then took control of him and escorted him out of the building, placed him in a police car with an officer inside and outside that vehicle. Once that had occurred, there was a systematic evacuation of rooms and hallways for safety. So we still weren't sure exactly what all we had at that point. On the timeline, I want to go back and talk about the other response. As we said, at 2:04, deputies and officers responded. At 2:06, medics arrived at the school. At 2:07, the medics were cleared by officers to enter the building, that room was safe where we had someone had been injured. At 2:09, they made contact with Abigail, and at 2:11, she was transported to a local hospital where she's currently undergoing treatment. And again, if I didn't state earlier, she is still listed in stable condition, and I had a good conversation with her today. We talked a little bit about when the officers arrived. The young man was taken into custody and escorted out of the building. And officers responded then and began to put a plan together quickly to evacuate the hallways, the classrooms in a systematic order. But remember, we're dealing with elementary kids, right? And I will tell you, I was touched by the way that those officers interacted with those kids as they moved them from the hallway to the gymnasium. The faculty and staff there, and I'm not just talking about teachers. It was heroic, the way I saw them take care of those young people. officers and faculty members took the students into the gymnasium, that's where they would stay until they were reunited with their family. The individuals that were in the classroom were taken to the library, where they were held there, kept there with detectives, a couple of teachers, and eventually some school counselors. When they arrived, we escorted them safely to that area as we continued to clear the building so that they could be, the professionals could be with our young people, with students. We talked about the detectives and counselors that were escorted there to make sure that we had professionals with the individuals that had been in that room. Once the building was safe, forensics entered the classroom and processed the crime scene. I want to share with you what we recovered there. One spent shell casing, a backpack, a cell phone, and a 9mm Taurus firearm was recovered. The firearm was recovered close to the student's desk where the shooting occurred. Mrs. Zwerner was providing class instruction. The 6-year-old child displayed a firearm, pointed it at her, and fired one round. There was no physical struggle or fight. She was providing instruction to her class. There was one round fired. Abigail took a defensive position, and what I'm sharing with you is because she has allowed me to share it. She took a defensive position where she raised her hand. The round went through her hand, exited the rear of her hand, and into her upper chest. And that's as far as I'm going to go with that. I'm not a physician, and the complications there, but that was the injury as she leaned back and took that round. She suffered a gunshot wound, but she was still able to get all of her students out of that classroom. From the video surveillance we have of the hallway, you can see the students running out of that classroom across the hall into, and I'm estimating about 17 to 20 students out of that classroom across all into other classrooms. Mrs. Zwerner was the last person to leave that class. She made a right turn and started down the hallway, and then she stopped. And she turned around. She turned around to make sure that every one of those students was safe. She made her way down to the administration office, where we later find out that she was given first aid as dispatchers talked to individuals who had made phone calls, and they took care of her through communications until the paramedics got with her. Several faculty members were interviewed at the scene. Others, there will be follow-up interviews. There will be follow-up interviews with Abigail. The students that were there, we will work with child psychologists who are trained to interview children. We'll work with them. We want to talk about what they saw in their accounts. Now, once I arrived, myself and other officers, I got a quick brief assessment of the situation, what we had, and I wanted to get out as quick as we could to our community and our parents, right, that we did not have an active situation, the individual was in custody, and that there was no longer threat. I tried to explain a little bit about how children were being moved to the gymnasium. We'll work with our school board members and faculty and staff there, our sheriff deputies, that came all together, and we had a systematic process of releasing a child to their parent. They were identified, and we got them back together. You can imagine there was some frustration by parents wanting their children back, and I can understand that. Myself and the mayor worked the line as parents lined up, calming them down, reassuring that their students were okay. But you saw tears and frustration, anxiety, and I appreciate that, sir. Because in those situations, what we have to do is try to keep people calm because they're just unsure of what they had. And as we reunited, as I saw school employees walking students and officers walking students back to their families, I saw tears and smiles on both sides. Almost in that moment of seeing our fire department, sheriff's department, police officers, school board members, school officials working together to reunite those children and loved ones, and the care that they took for those young people, it was amazing. Laughing, supporting, holding their hands, talking to them. I saw children in the gym that were making fun of officers and officers making fun of them, just bonding and trying to make that situation that we're dealing with the best that we could. They remembered how important those young people are in that time of, they may never forget. The parents of the 6-year-old child were contacted by the police department and asked them to meet us back at police headquarters. They did so, and at that point is where we interviewed the child and his mother. We determined that the firearm was in the residence where they lived, and the child had obtained that firearm, placed it in his backpack, and brought it to school. He was brought to school that day by his mother later that morning. The 6-year-old child brought to school, like we said there, and it was determined we wanted to know about that firearm. It's one of the things that we did in our press conference there. Was one of the questions I had. Where did that firearm come from? The firearm was legally purchased by the child's mother out of York County. Detectives, so after we had this information, like I said, this is unprecedented. We're dealing with a 6-year-old. Detectives talked with Human Services and Child Protective Services, our Commonwealth Attorney's Office. I've talked to Mr. Gwynn several times, as late as last night and this afternoon. The Community Service Board, which addresses mental and behavioral health. Due to the age of the child, we made these contacts and conversations to seek guidance on possible services, because none of us have a lot of information dealing with something like this. Based on this conversation, an emergency custody order was initiated by detectives, and the 6-year-old child was transported to a local hospital where he was evaluated. The CSB, Community Service Board, determined that a temporary detention order would be obtained from a magistrate, and the child is currently receiving treatment at a medical facility. Now, the department will continue to conduct this investigation, which will consist of follow-up interviews. We want to talk to the individuals that were in that classroom with help of a child psychologist. We want to meet with Human Services or Child Protective Services to see if there's any interaction or any cases that they have with the family or the child. And we also want to work with Dr. Parker and his staff, which have been extremely forthcoming with information of any issues they may have dealing with the child's behavior or any behavioral issues or concerns. I'd like to reiterate, and I said that night, I just want to reiterate that this shooting was not accidental. It was intentional. Now, I believe, and I told her today, I believe that Miss Zwerner, Abigail, that she saved lives on Friday. I cannot be more impressed with the faculty and staff of the school. I can't be more impressed with those children. The way they exited the hallways and went with instruction, the officers and deputies who talked to them, some holding their hands as they walked through, and the number of school employees that came in and we escorted to the gymnasium and even to the library to work with those young children. And I also want to thank all of our federal partners, state and local officials who've called and asked if there's any support that you need from the governor's office, all over the state, but primarily around our surrounding jurisdictions. Is there anything you need? And I believe that's because of the relationship that we have. So as we go forward, those are the conversations we'll be having as we continue to put this investigation together. There are a lot of things that we need to continue to do. We're only 3 days into this investigation. But I just wanted to share with you a little bit about our response, what we had, a little bit of the timeline, what was recovered, and what we have done at this point, and where we are as we go forward to have those conversations with our Commonwealth Attorney and the CSB board on the best avenue to go forward in this situation. I'll take some questions at the end. At the end, I want to make sure that Dr. Parker and our mayor speak. But before I step away, I just want to say that I am appreciative and thankful for the partnership and the relationship we have. And I want to thank you for your being there and just kind of all of us working together. I think that's what makes this city great. Horrible situation happened that we were able to come together. So I just wanted to say thank you.
And good afternoon. I will start my remarks by thanking quite a few organizations. I know our police department, sheriff's deputies, our city council members and our school board, and that great staff at Richneck Elementary for their response and continued support of our students and our community moving forward from this event. When I arrived at Richneck Elementary School on Friday, I was coming from the southern portion of the city, and it took almost 30 minutes to get there. And by that time, a lot of operations were already in place. Our sheriff's office and with supporters, police had already sectioned off the area, and parents at that time, while very concerned, were cooperative. I'd like to thank the Richneck parents. They were very cooperative. They allowed us to put operations in place. They allowed Chief Drew and team to continue to search the building, and they allowed us to put a reunification plan in place in a very fairly short time, which allowed us to identify parents or guardians and make sure that they were reunified with their students. It took approximately 3 hours to complete that reunification process, which I thought, under the circumstances that we were dealing with, was very well done. So I'd like to thank all involved there. My remarks, we are very pleased to hear that our teacher, Abby, is improving. I look forward to seeing her soon. And we are continuing to support the staff of Richneck Elementary and the students. As of this day, all students who were in the classroom in that incident we've been offering mental health supports. We've reached out to those families. We've continued to reach out to the Richneck Elementary staff to offer any mental health support as needed, and we have created a helpline that allows any parents or any community members who need support to contact that helpline, even if it's just a matter of talking to their child about what occurred. We also continue to offer that support to all of our staff in Newport News, teachers, families, and the community, because an incident like this does not traumatize one community; it traumatizes the entire city. And we're at a point in public education today where we have to continue to do our best to not only attract and retain the best teachers and the best staff that can serve our community, but also ensure that we have a safe learning environment for students to continue to grow and learn. And in many instances, we've had challenges here in Newport News, and we're not unlike many cities across the nation who have struggled with the impact of gun violence. However, we have to be very proactive moving forward, and to that, I say that our first approach this week has been to continue to follow up with the chief in his ongoing active investigation, but to conduct our compliance investigation as well. Whenever we have a serious incident of this nature, we want to unpack what transpired leading up to that incident, and so we can learn from it, not only from a procedural standpoint, but also from a safety standpoint. And we're in that process of doing that first. This is day 3, as Chief mentioned, and day 1 of our compliance investigation, and we will continue to meet with staff, collect statements, and also assess what transpired on Friday. Our next concern is the mental well-being of our faculty, our staff, not only the staff of Richneck Elementary, but our entire division. I've received many emails, some supportive, some concerned, some afraid, and it's understandable. Some angry, and I'm angry. But I know that we have to find a pathway to move forward. And I know that means that while we may be angry or in fear and don't understand all the details of what transpired, we'll get to that point where we can answer all of the questions, where we can clearly communicate what moving forward will look like. And I'd like to also thank those educators, principals, and students who are attending school today. I know it took great steps for some of them to wake up and go into a school building today. And that's the type of educators we have in Newport News. We're committed to our mission. We want to make sure that our students have a place to learn, and we want to continue to work on those areas of safety and other areas that we're going to focus on. So we have canceled classes at Richneck Elementary for the entire week, and we're going to use that week productively. We had a very good meeting with the staff today, virtual, and I offered some questions that we want them to answer for us around school safety, what they would like to see take place in order for them to return to the school. What are some of the expectations for us in terms of supporting Richneck Elementary and their community? Once we gather that information from the staff, we will start building out a plan for our schools to begin school again. We do not have a timeline at this time for school operations to begin at Richneck Elementary. We want to work on the mental health of our staff and really build out a plan with their input that will allow us to proceed forward with their cooperation and the cooperation of our parents and families. We also have set out a town hall for the Richneck community so we can start hearing from parents on their concerns and also begin to share out some things that we may do different moving forward. It's important to note that we have very detailed safety procedures in Newport News Public Schools. We've had 2 instances over the past, this being the second, over the past 17 months that involve gun violence in our schools. We learned a lot from the first incident, but one of the things we have to think, and it was a secondary school incident, it was a high school incident. In no way do I believe that we were fully prepared for a 6-year-old student to bring a gun to school, a weapon to school and shoot his teacher. And just doing a little bit of research, since 1970, there have been 3 instances over 50 years where a 6-year-old student or less has discharged a weapon in a school. So there's a lot to learn here and a lot to unpack. And I would not stand here and say that we have all the answers. But we're up to the task of making sure that we do what's necessary to make sure that our elementary schools are safe, and that we can minimize any risk of future violence in our schools. So with that being said, we've talked about some of the instances that have occurred. I want to make sure that everyone understands that part of our preparedness is to train everyone in active shooter training. We call it the Civilian Response to Active Shooter Events course, or CRAES. I believe that every school division across the country should probably follow those procedures. What we saw were teachers who took immediate response to secure their students, to make sure that they separated themselves from a potential threat, and they responded accordingly. And I believe those types of things will happen through proper training. So with that being said, I really want to raise up our Richneck staff for their response, their active response until the police could get there and really support us during this event. And we'll continue to unpack over the next few days what transpired on that day, how can we prevent it, how can we learn from this event moving forward, and then we'll share that with our communities and continue to seek their input and feedback. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Mayor Philip Jones, and thank you all for being here. The first thing that I want to say is that it's been a long 3 days for our city and our community. I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that. Second of all, I want to thank all of the first responders that were involved. And when you go and you actually look at that list, that's more than just the sheriff's office or the police department or the fire or the staff or the teachers or the principals. There are so many individuals that I want to say thank you. Thank you to the parents that showed up, that were orderly, that allowed us to evacuate the children in a safe manner, ensure that we had everyone accounted for. Thank you for the police that established the outer and the inner cordon. Thank you to my colleagues on council and on school board who worked the line for hours with me. I appreciate that and appreciate our partnership. So I just want to say thank you. My colleagues, both council and school board, have spent a lot of time at the hospital over the last few days. And when you think about Abby, when you think about what it means to be a hero, you're almost at a loss for words. During my time in the Marines, I've met heroes. I've met living legends, and I can tell you Abby would be welcome in our company anytime. The fact that we live by a motto of Semper Fidelis, of always being faithful, and she was faithful as a teacher, and she was ensured that everyone is accounted for, and that she was the last one to leave. Okay, I do want to say that. As mayor, and my priority is to ensure that the safety of our children is number one. That is the most paramount thing, and we are always going to ensure that. The members of City Council and myself, we stand committed to supporting the Newport News School Board as they review policies and protocols and take necessary steps to safeguard against this happening ever again. I could not be prouder of our first responders, of Chief Drew. It really is. Watching you work has been an honor. This has shaken us. This has shaken me. But Newport News is a strong community. And together, we are going to work together to ensure that the well-being of our children remains a priority. And as mayor, that's what we're going to do. Thank you.
Okay, before we take questions, I just want to clarify that I know there was some frustration about not releasing Ms. Zwerner's name initially, but Chief did get permission from her this morning to do that. So, okay, any questions?
So I don't know exactly verbatim. I know that there are faculty members that we want to talk to, and that there are those children that were in the room and their parents. Those are some follow-up interviews we want to have, but we want to make sure that we have those as they fall into, as we recover evidence and process the information we have coming in. So I don't want to get into comments that they have made. I still remember, and I just, again, caution, I want to be as open and transparent as I can. I think we have a good relationship that way, but I also don't want to jeopardize any investigation that moves forward, and there's some different moving pieces and components. So I wouldn't want to get into actual statements that were given by anyone who might have some of that information. Is that fair? Those are two great questions. You know, as we will work with our professionals, we'll get some information back about some treatment that is being going on right now, an evaluation, to hear some of those things. As far as charges against family members, parents, there's been a lot of questions. I've seen a lot of posts in the media, and I am certainly not as well versed as others in the social media side, but I've seen a lot of conversation about, are the parents going to be. So talking with our Commonwealth Attorney, we have a great relationship in the utmost respect. I met with him or talked with him. I was with him last night. We talked today. That once the information, right, once all the interviews have been conducted, as the gentleman behind you had just asked about, if the parents said anything, once all that stuff is obtained, we know what we know from Human Services or Child Protective Services, what information the schools have, the other interviews that we still need. I'd like the detectives want to go back and have some more conversation with Abigail. We will present that and sit down with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. They will review that, and a great comment he made to me today was where the facts are and what the law supports will determine if there will be any charges. But I would be wrong to make that statement now. It'll be where the investigation leads. They're still trying to put all of that together. Sir.
Chief, you said you believe this was an intentional act, and you believe the teacher here saved lives in that classroom. Do you have reason to believe that this 6-year-old was targeting multiple people in that classroom?
Everything we have at this point that it was intentional. I do believe that. I believe that the actions were at or towards the teacher, but you never know how someone's going to want to react with a firearm, with students, and we're talking about a 6-year-old child. I don't know what all was going through that that child's mind. But what I do know is that she made sure that every one of those kids were out of that room, and she was the last one to leave, and she took upon herself in that situation, after suffering a gunshot wound, to make sure that her students, and she made sure that I understood that, those are her students, that they were safe. So I believe she did save lives, because I don't know what else might have happened if those kids would have stayed in that room. Sir.
Superintendent, could you talk about what the plan is to address the students when they come back to school?
Absolutely. Our first steps right now is to offer mental health support and then to provide the community with some transparency as far as what occurred and solicit their input in how we will proceed forward. Once those plans are developed, that will involve supports for students. We know that we have a crisis response team that started their work on Friday evening, and they will be there for as long as they're needed once school begins for the students and faculty of Richneck Elementary School. So right now, our goal right now is to build out a plan for us to transition back to operations. But it will involve the input of parents, the input of staff, supports for our students as they transition back. And that's as far as I have right now, because that I cannot communicate a plan right now without their input.
Did we interpret that correctly? The student just pulled out the gun from the backpack out of nowhere unprompted? There was no verbal argument?
So there was no physical struggle. There was no fight. The firearm was displayed from his person, not from his backpack. And he pointed that firearm and fired one round. So for me, that when altercation was an interaction, maybe that would have been a better word, but I can tell you what I know today, and we got to remember, we were just hours, right? What we know today is that she was providing instruction. He displayed a firearm, he pointed it, and he fired one round.
So, Chief, the other day, so there was no actual
Can you repeat the question? I can't hear the question.
You just kind of out of the blue pulls out the gun and shoots her.
You're asking me, is that what happened? Did he display a firearm and shoot her?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And he did not. How did he have the gun outside of his? I mean, he was just holding it and firing.
So you got to remember, his question was, if you didn't hear that he's asking how was he holding the firearm. There's a lot of follow-up interviews that we need to do. We need to work with child psychologists, professionals, as we talk to the individuals inside that room. There's some more interviews we want to do with Abigail to determine that. But it didn't come out of the backpack. He had that firearm on his person.
Can you tell us if the family had any interaction with law enforcement?
His question was, can you tell us if the family had any interaction with law enforcement? I can tell you that all of those things are being reviewed. But I would just go back to say that the firearm was purchased legally by the child's mother, and that she had the right to do that.
Were there any disciplinary actions on record with the child?
So those things, again, we will be obtaining. His question was, are any disciplinary actions on file with the child? Those things we'll be looking at. I couldn't even share with you that because it is a child. We'll be working with our Child Protective Services and our school system. It will be put in the report and then submitted. I want to make sure that the Commonwealth Attorney and all that need to have their eyes on that investigation have that information. She asked about how many students were in the classroom. I don't want to speak for Dr. Parker, but from what I saw and from my conversation with Abigail, I believe it was about 17 to 20, 16 to 20 students. There needs to be some more follow-up interviews before I would answer that question. Okay, is that fair? His question was, can you tell us who took the firearm away from the child? I can tell you that it fired one time. There was a school employee who entered that room as deputies and officers entered that was restraining that child. The firearm was on the floor, and that's where it remained. But there's some more interviews that we need to go through before we go down that.
You said that the mother purchased the gun legally, but how was it secured that the 6-year-old could get it? Was it secured in the home or left unsecured?
That's a great question. We're trying to piece that together. Her question was how the firearm was secured in the home. That is a key element for us to determine. Right now we have some statements, but we want to shore those up. So I'm not going to go into much further than that. What I can tell you is the child did take the firearm from the house. He put it in a backpack and took it to school that day. But I don't want to go at this point about how that firearm was secured, where it was secured at, and how the child may or may not have known where it was at.
Also, how does a 6-year-old have the strength and dexterity and know-how to fire a gun?
You know, that is a great question, and I wish that we never had to have it asked. How does a 6-year-old know how to use a firearm? I don't know that I could give you an adequate answer. I know that I have seen some video games out there that depict it pretty clearly. Whether it's some think it might be a toy at one point. I don't know how to answer that. It's unprecedented. I don't know how to answer that question.
Possible prior experience firing one?
I don't know how to answer that question fairly.
Was this a general education classroom, and were there any other staff members in the room?
I'm not exactly sure what type of class it was, or I mean, Dr. Parker, if you want to touch base on that
Question was whether it was a general education classroom and whether any other staff members, to my knowledge, it is a general education classroom, and to my knowledge, there were no other staff members at that time present in the classroom. But we're investigating our chronology of what occurred, and so we're going to confirm that.
We've received many emails from parents, not just that school, but other schools in Newport News, asking about the safety of their kids. They're not sending their kids to school from other schools. What's your message to the parents? Are your schools safe, and what steps are you going to make after this to make sure they are safe?
The question is, what are we doing to keep our schools safe? We have protocols in place for school safety, and we also provide those our staff and/or administration training in school safety procedures. Again, this is an isolated incident that is unprecedented over a 50-year period. 3 instances over 50 years. While every situation creates alarm, and the pain and anguish and the whole process of emotions that have to go through with that, we continue to assess our security procedures and work on our procedures with our police department and make modifications if there's something that's missing. Now, what's clearly missing in this case, and we've addressed metal detection, random searching, and all kinds of other things at the secondary level due to an incident that occurred a year ago. I'll be honest, who would be prepared for a 6-year-old to bring a loaded weapon onto school or a weapon onto school and shoot their teacher? So with that being said, the next step would be to look solely at that deterrent. At the elementary level, we've primarily focused on an adult or a person entering the building as an active shooter. And we've made plenty of safety adjustments, hardening our buildings, making sure we have safety protocols for entry points, making sure that we have protocols in the building, such as training for our staff for active shooters. We've done this at both elementary, middle, and high. But we rely quite a bit on metal detection as part of our deterrence at the secondary level. And I believe, and I hate to be at this point where I'm considering this, but we have to start relying on those types of deterrents at the elementary level as well. So our coming out of this our debrief of this situation, it may warrant us to reconsider all metal detectors at all of our buildings, and that may be, at least that's one extra layer of support. Now, I will say, with metal detection and other forms of security, no single method of safety measure is going to completely ensure that no incident will occur in the future. I would never make that guarantee. It requires the support of our community to make sure guns are not in the hands of youth. It requires us to do the training necessary and to have all of the layers of our safety plan in place: video surveillance, controlled entry and access points, make metal detection and searching, hot tip lines where kids or parents may contact us. We avoid a lot of situations with that. Social media monitoring. There are a lot of layers of safety that we are already in place, and this is an unfortunate incident, but I would dare say that we do have a lot of effective protocols in place to maintain the safety in our schools today. This incident right here will cause us to rethink how we handle our youngest children coming into our division. And I mentioned being angry earlier because I know my board members know how I feel about making our schools look anything like a prison or prison-like procedures in our schools. I want our schools to be great places to educate children. But I also understand, and I agree with the sentiment of my staff and parents and families, that if we can't maintain safety or at least get to the point where we can have an effective and safe school day, kids won't learn anyway. So that's where we are right now as a staff and as a community. I will continue to work with my school board, city, and mayor to look at our procedures. And I don't believe anything would have avoided this circumstance right here unless kids walk through a metal detector. So that's something that we just have to consider moving forward. And the question is whether we have cameras in the classroom. I would, from that standpoint, I don't like to mention where our cameras are in our buildings, just for the needed security measures that we have in place. We have cameras, complete coverage in the interior where we're able to monitor student behavior and staff behavior. But places like restrooms, interior classrooms, there are some, do not necessarily monitor those on a random basis. We have monitoring systems in place to record. So we currently do not put cameras in every classroom in our schools.
So this incident is not on video?
That's something I'll have to go back and assess. I know there was some recording taking place and there was firsthand account. But in this particular case, I would have to go back and review the video evidence to see what we have recorded in our school division. And I have not at this time. This is day one. I have not reviewed video evidence at this particular point. Chief Drew has been leading the investigation from a criminal standpoint. My investigation will be completely different. It's from a compliance-related standpoint.
Sorry. Superintendent, you had said this is the second incident of gun violence in the Newport school. Do you know how many other incidents this year occurred in which a child brought either a gun or ammunition or some other deadly weapon to a school that didn't result in violence, but might have been picked up by teachers? Can you say that that didn't happen, or what do you know about that?
And I'll ask, are you referring to Newport News Public Schools or other school divisions? Okay, I can't give you a number of any safety measures. We do safety searches, and if a student is found with a weapon, it is documented, recorded as such. But at this point, I can't give you a number of any confiscations or any weapons violations at this particular point.
Chief, how many bullets were in that firearm? Parents reporting that the student had previously threatened this teacher in his classroom and perhaps even brought bullets into the classroom.
At this point, I'm not at liberty to speak to that because we're still investigating the instance that occurred.
How many bullets were in the firearm, and do you believe the student would have turned the gun on other students?
I don't know what was going through that child's mind. He's 6 years old. I don't know. I don't want to release how many rounds were in the firearm. I can tell you there were more than one, but I don't want to go into that. I will tell you it was a 9mm Taurus firearm, a handgun that was recovered.
Chief, do you want to send more details?
You had said he's in a hospital right now.
All I'm going to say, the question is asking where the child is at.
Well, what's the next step for him?
So the next step will be that because of his age, he has 96 hours to go in front of a judge, and they will determine continual treatment or the next steps. But that will be handled by several individuals around that age group that specialize in dealing with a child, again, a 6-year-old. So that has to wait to be determined. But he has 96 hours before that child will go in front of a judge to determine what are the next steps.
What does that mean? You're bringing up charges against him?
That means that a judge will determine if we continue with that temporary detention order, if treatment and evaluation continue, or what the next steps may be. So we just have to wait until that. I want to make sure, again, I am not going to push and press this to be a quick. We're going to make sure that there's a lot of questions. You all have asked a lot of questions. I promise you, multiply that by 3, and that's the questions that we have. But we are not going to rush through it. Did you have a question, sir?
More details on the actions of the staff member who apparently entered the room.
So his question was, do I want to add any more information? All I can say is this, and then I'm going to step aside, is that there is video recording from the hallway that we have observed. That's how we know the children ran out of the classroom and across the hall. When the gunshot went off, there was a school official, I am not going to release her name or even her position, that entered that classroom and restrained that young man, that child, I should say the child, I'm not saying young, that child, the 6-year-old child, until sheriff deputies entered and officers entered and held him. I believe that the child struck her once or twice, and then she released him, and he was taken into police custody and escorted out of the building safely.
Okay, I think that we're going to wrap up now. Thank you very much. If there are more questions or if there's any further information we can release on the criminals side of the investigation, we will do that through Twitter. So be sure and follow our page there. So thank you all for coming.